people would say to me things like, the Griff is just slower. And I would say, like, that sounds nice to me. Tell myself ahead of time, like, I'm not going to have high expectations. Whatever happens, happens. We're going to go. We're going to have fun. Give him the season kind of thing. And what I kind of told myself was kill a grouse for the dog one way or another. Then we'll start putting some rules on. And I shot at some bump birds for sure in the beginning, just trying to get that first one for him, which, again, maybe I'll pay for it here in the future. His tail was going, he was all intense and just working the edge of this logging road, and he locked up on point. Beautiful. I was like, smile on my face. So I got ready. In my head, I was like, it's going to happen. And this bird flushed out right at my face, and I promptly missed the first trigger, and it turned to my right, going away from me, and I swung and pulled that second trigger.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY presented by Standing Stone Supply. My guest this time is Nate Kennedy. Nate, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to finally do this. You and I have kind of developed a little social media relationship over the past year or so, and it's always fun kind of getting to know people through that lens. But a few things have happened in the past few weeks that garnered us to finally connect and do a phone call, and we're going to get into the story and what's kind of changed. But first, I want you to kind of introduce yourself, tell everybody what you do professionally, where you're located, what kind of dog you run, all the fun stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nate Kennedy. I work for the Ruffed Grouse Society as an engagement coordinator here in the Northeast. So I have everybody from New York to Maine and everything in between. And I live up in northern New York, way up on the Canadian border. And I have a 16-ish month-old Wirehaired Pointing Griffon.
And
my
this
first
is your
bird dog.
I was about to say, this is your first one, right?
Yes, sir.
So I want to start with A, what made you want to get a bird dog in general, and then B, why a Griffon?
Yeah, so it's funny. I always had like a little bit of an interest in hunting dogs. We ran beagles and stuff with an uncle of mine when I was a kid. And I'd say before I came to RGS, I had a growing interest in bird dogs specifically, but not enough to kind of make me take the plunge. I'm a lifelong hunter, mostly a deer hunter, but I've always, I run the generalist route. So definitely always had a small interest. When I came to RGS, I got a ton of people that said to me, how'd you get the job with no dog? And it was like, at first I was like, well, obviously you don't, that's not a requirement, but more and more, it became a real big part of the conversation. And I told myself off the rip that I really was going to hold off on that. I didn't know if I had the lifestyle for a hunting dog and the home life, or we travel a ton. And it did not take much into the first hunting season with since I had come on to RGS to get to go out with some folks. And I grew up grouse hunting without dogs. And so the first few trips that I did with bird dogs for Ruffed Grouse, I was like, man, and I took my time. I spent my whole first year basically with RGS kind of softly planning to get a dog, interviewing everybody and anybody that I could about breeds, and I'm a total newbie, so asking every question that I could possibly come up with to as many people as possible, and had the fortune to hunt over a ton of different dogs and a lot of different breeds. And I had I don't remember what it was. I almost think it was something on Meat Eater. But when I first started thinking about dogs, I had this like small interest in the Griff. And then I spent a full year just trying to figure it out on what I might end up with. And I came back around to the Griff. I don't know as though I have a great reason as to why that happened, but I think the biggest thing was I had a lot of people point me towards that as like a good first timer dog. I was mildly terrified of some of the parts of bringing on a dog. So that was the big reason. I knew off the bat that I wanted a bearded dog. I hunted over a ton of wire hairs and draughts my first year, and I really fell in love with that. but I think the kind of my knowledge, newbie knowledge of the kind of subtle differences between the wire hairs and the draughts and the griff kind of pointed me toward the griff being a little bit of a better dog for my kind of setup and home life. And it's been awesome. I'm very happy with the decision.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack on that kind of background, if you will, but I want to start with growing up and hunting without a dog. You know, this is, you're just a couple years removed, again, like year and a half from hunting without a dog. And then getting the position at RGS, you had a familiarity with hunting grouse, but you just didn't have the dog to go with it. Can you recall like the biggest stark differences? Like what was it about hunting with a dog that you felt was missing when hunting without one? Could you kind of contrast that and say one way or the other if you think one kind of was more successful than the other, or just kind of some thought processes when you kind of think back on the time pre-dog?
For sure. Yeah. The biggest difference I can tell you was before I was gearing up to go on my first hunting trip for grouse with a buddy that I work with and his dog. And his exact words to me were, I think you'll be surprised as to how many more birds we see. And I never forgot that, because that to me has been the biggest difference. I'm still living locally to where I grew up and having the fun of running my dog in, quote unquote covers that were just hunting spots when I was a kid. So I'm, running him in the same little cover that I killed my first grouse in and things like that. And at my parents' place where I've hunted my whole life. And we always grew up hunting grouse around the deer camp. If somebody had gone deer hunting and, hey, I saw a grouse down by the, you know what I mean? We'd switch out for a shotgun and take off and see what we could do and that kind of thing. We also hunted them a ton like late season. So after deer season closed around the holidays and stuff, we'd just go, small game hunting or brush kicking. And, if it was a cottontail or a snowshoe or squirrels or grouse, whatever got up, you know what I mean? Whatever we could find is what we were kind of after. And so the biggest difference outside of just the fun of the dog being there was the amount of birds that, you're really able to work in a spot that you might have maybe had a flush of when you first walked into the woods, just kind of kicking brush. Now it's like you're working that piece of woods and actively finding birds, which has been cool. The other big difference for me is not grouse related. It's woodcock, because I never saw a woodcock my whole life until I started following people and their dogs around. And a couple of years ago, we did the opener kind of on my home turf here. And I had said to the guys I was hunting with, like, I know there's grouse here. I've hunted here my whole life. I've never seen a woodcock here. I don't know that they're even around. And they, we found all sorts of woodcock because they'll just let you walk right by them. So that's the big thing for me there too, is like actually being able to find and hunt woodcock. You can't really go kick brush and do very well on woodcock because they'll just let you walk on by.
Absolutely. Yeah, they'll rely on that camo. And so you can't recall, do you think maybe growing up, if you're covering areas where grouse and then fast forward to now and you're coming across that many woodcock, I'm sure that they were there. I'm wondering if you did kick them up and you were just maybe you weren't familiar with them. Maybe you didn't know what they were. Maybe they were just foreign. Maybe you didn't recognize the wing whistle and as it kind of gets up and flushes. Do you think maybe you kicked them up and you just didn't know what they were?
That's definitely possible. I do know that I said I never saw woodcock until one time duck hunting, not near where I grew up, down southern New York. Like walking into a duck blind in the marsh, it was the first time I ever like recognized like, hey, I think that was a woodcock. But I could have flushed them as a kid, but I couldn't tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, we can't remember that far back. Heck, we can't even remember some of the birds that we did know flushing back then, but
No doubt.
just out of curiosity. So you get the job at RGS and people kind of show you the light and say, hey, if you're actually going to be serious about this, then it's time to get a dog, and you start doing the research. The Griffon, man, like you said, it's like there's a few breeds and you can kind of contribute this to all breeds to some extent, but I think there are a few breeds that stand out in my head to where when you think of them, it's kind of like the type of person that gets a specific breed. It's just like they really just kind of go hand in hand, right? You know, if you think of Griffon, you can kind of think of your typical type of person or hunter. I think that you can kind of say the same thing with Vizslas. I think you can say the same thing with maybe small Munsterlanders, something like that. Um, what was it that you, if you think back on it, I know that you said that you can't recall like the one thing, but what was it that the Griffon stood out to you more so than the Drots or these other bearded dogs that you were attracted to?
I don't know that I can give you a solid answer on that. I know one thing, again, kind of pointing back to the almost anxiety that I had about getting a dog. People would say to me things like, the Griff is just slower. And I would say, like, that sounds nice to me. Now that I've had a year and a season of doing this, like I'm not ready or planning for a second dog yet, but I think I'll probably I'm leaning like setter in the future, because now that I've done this a little bit, I have a lot less anxiety about the dog running a little bigger or having a little bit more energy and things like that. But at the time, thinking about getting this dog and having it in my home for the first time ever, I was really leaning towards things that people were giving me as a negative. And then we do have a cat. And so I had some folks tell me a few horror stories about the wire hairs and the drots with cats. And I think, knowing what I know now, probably wasn't too much of a worry and equally could have been an issue with a Griff. But at the time I was like checking that on the list of, things as to why to get a Griffin. Um outside of that, I also, and I've spent this first season really focused on trying to build a grouse dog, so I haven't really lived up to this as much, but I do hunt other things, and I duck hunt and I hunt geese. And I was really interested in the versatile breed thing when I first started learning about bird dogs. So that was kind of a factor too.
Do you think that you're, being unfamiliar with the dog world and curious and trying to figure out what dog you wanted, that helped you in your professional role and the engagement coordinator to where wherever you went, you knew you were going to be talking to bird dog guys. So that always kind of gave you some kind of common element to where you always had some questions queued up and in the holster so that you could just fire it to them. I'm assuming that probably always gave you some kind of natural tie into a good conversation wherever you went.
Yeah, absolutely. Both. It's funny, like both one-on-one conversations where I'm really trying to pick that person's brain, but maybe more interesting, definitely more entertaining than that is getting a few different people together and you throw a question out there and
You're
they've
gonna
got
get
different
it.
dogs. It's
Yeah.
like pickup trucks. You know what I mean? It's like, and that was, and I had a lot of people they are breed specific people, and they were like, the setter's the only way. That's what you need. I'm a setter guy. You need a setter. You want a duck hunt, get a lab. You know what I mean? Like, just get a set. I had a lot of that, but I also had quite a few people that were well versed in multiple breeds. Some folks from the NABDA community that are judges and things like that I got to pick their brain, and they have experience with a variety of breeds, and that was helpful for me too. Like, just, but yeah, I quite literally spent a year just asking as many people as I could the same questions over and over again, getting a lot of great answers. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough when you're kind of entering this world, or at least you have some kind of curiosity and you're asking questions. When you're speaking to different people in the world, I would say, this is just an arbitrary number, but I would say like two-thirds of the people in this space, if you ask them, well, which breed should I consider? I'd say at least two-thirds of them are just going to be breed blind, and they're just going to say whatever breed that they have because that's what they know, that's what they love, that's obviously why they pick their dogs. But when you can start talking to somebody like judges who see a whole bunch of different breeds all over the country, that's a lot of good information and value to really help make up your mind because it I always crack up when I open up Facebook or something and somebody's like, what's a good breed for this? And it's just like nobody ever even bothers to read the actual like requirements or the context that somebody puts in, where it's like, hey, I got kids, I want this, I want this, I want this. You go in the comments and it's just like, I have this. And it's like, no, they didn't ask which dog you have. They asked which would be a good breed to fit in this. Now, granted, you can argue that's not the best place to ask the question as a Facebook group all you want, but it's always fun when you kind of get hit with the fire hose of everybody just, announcing whichever breed that they have a preference for.
For sure. Yeah. And just again, I had a lot of people that were like, you need to think about more than just that. Like, even I was in Minnesota, grouse hunting in Minnesota, and asking people that were there about their dogs and talking about kind of the cover that we had hit that day. And they were like, well, you need to think about the cover at home. Is this what you're looking for? Like the day we had today, and it's not. I mean, I'm hunting pocket covers here, and it's yeah, lot went into that first year, and I flip-flopped a little bit, but ultimately, I mean, I did come right back around to the Griffin. It's been good.
Well, talk to me about, you get the Griff, you finally get it home, and like you said, you had a lot of worries or at least some anxiety on a couple different fronts. Walk me through how you started alleviating that, because it's, a lot of people are nervous when they get into this. Then they bring the dog in, and either those concerns and anxieties are justified, and they're like, oh man, like it's kind of like they just got themselves into a situation they really weren't fully prepared for. But then others, they'll get it, and it's just like, what we advise them to do is educate, get a game plan, kind of understand what you're going for, and those concerns and anxieties are kind of alleviated right out of the gate in a lot of ways. It's kind of like, oh, I can do this. I'm familiar with this. Where did you fall in that kind of I don't know, the where did you fall on that?
I would say I over planned, which was good for me. I'm a I'm a chronic like lister, so I bought a composition notebook and several books. And like the thing was that before now I have like a year plus of a little bit of experience, and I can recognize things a little bit. But at the time, it was like I bought a few books, and I had been listening to a ton of podcasts. But other than maybe like a specific like your puppy series, for example, at the time was like great because it was like this is day one stuff. Uh but like I had bought a couple of books that when I started going through them to plan to get this dog, I was like, this book is written for people that have a little bit more of a foundation. And a few people recommended Joan Bailey's book, and I read it twice before I brought the dog home, and I think I've read it twice since. But like I said, over planned to the point of crazy, maybe a little bit. But I kind of used that book like a checklist, and I lined out each kind of chapter like legitimately. Here's what I'm doing, checklist style, before I get the dog. The day of pickup, here's what we're doing, checklist style. And it worked for me. The first few months were great because I was really able to take that book, which is set up for, here's your puppy and its first, its arrival. And that worked for sure. But there was some learning curves. There were a lot of things in those even the first few days, that I was like, how come they didn't tell me about this? And all the months and months I've spent talking to people about dogs, we've talked about all this great in-depth stuff, but nobody told me that like this thing's in my living room terrorizing my wife and I for, yeah, a lot of learning curves right off the bat. But I would say at least pretty well prepared, both with, my little handy dandy checklist and notebook, but also again, I've been very, very blessed to have a crew of people that are like, don't hold back, send us your questions whenever. 10 p.m. you can text me about your dog in the crate and whatever, and I took full advantage of that. I leaned on a lot of people.
Yeah, having that sounding board or even a committee of people that you don't have to worry about coming across as sounding dumb or just worried about, if they're judging you for a dumb question. I'm a firm believer there are such things as dumb questions, but if you don't ask those dumb questions, then you're just going to remain dumb. I would rather just ask the dumb question, get it over with, and learn. But the sounding board and the committee like that really goes a long way in helping out, especially at the start, because what you just said is like, well, why didn't somebody warn me about this, or why didn't they tell me about this? A lot of us, I haven't been in this world for too terribly long, but I've been in it long enough to where you kind of forget what you didn't know at the very beginning stages of all of this, even from living with the dog to training in the dog in the field. So, if somebody doesn't think to ask the actual question, you almost kind of forget what your mindset and the questions and concerns that you had as a newbie owner. So it's hard to put yourself in that shoe, in those shoes, and advise somebody brand new getting into it, because we're so far removed from being in that situation, right? And then you take in the fact that every dog is completely different, even amongst the same breeds, to where it's just like, if that little T-Rex or Velociraptor is terrorizing you inside the living room, you can also point to another Griffon puppy out of the same litter oftentimes that's just content to lay in a dog bed in the corner, right? So it's like it's such a stark contrast from dog to dog, to where that's why I tell everybody, like, get all the resources that you can, read all of the books, listen to the podcast, watch YouTube videos, kind of take it all in, and then figure out what resonates with you, which in your case was Bailey's book.
Absolutely. Yeah, for that first year. And you know what, the payoff too is that, like, those other books that I bought, like, for example, Craig Doherty's book on like building a grouse dog.
Yeah.
8 months in, I cracked that open again, and I was like, oh, this stuff makes a lot more sense now. And a year in, now that we're into our first hunting season, I'm like, well, it's really starting to make sense. Let's say I were to get another puppy, I could use that. But man, that Bailey book at first was just, and it speaks to, like you said, you mentioned Facebook and stuff too, like having people to ask the real questions that are simple but very, very real is a thing that, like, for me, like, bring that dog home and he's like shredding my arms and my wife's arms, right? Like we look like we've been walking through prickly ash all day. And like the internet, you can Google, how do I get my puppy to stop biting my arms? The internet doesn't give you a realistic, nobody wants to put in writing, tap the dog on the nose. You know what I mean? The internet has all these little solutions that we tried, banging our head against the wall. And then finally somebody said to me, like, hey, just tap the dog on the nose. And she never did it again, and it's like, I understand why people might not want to put certain things in writing, but that the realistic, like, I needed it. I needed people to be like, hey, like, take the dog outside more than you need to, and it'll stop peeing on the floor.
Well, nobody wants to get into this and make mistakes, especially if it's going to cause longer term issues with their dog. And so if you're on your first one and you got a young pup that's just constantly teething, and you've tried everything, just a verbal correction or whatever, it's like, put myself back in the very beginner puppy shoe. It's just like, oh, I don't want to do anything that's gonna, jeopardize our relationship or make something difficult. But it's just like you said, it takes somebody to say, like, no, tap it on the nose, or pinch the gums underneath their teeth or something like that, to where, like, the dog has to learn boundaries. And like you said, Google is a very effective tool. I use it all the time, but if you go in there and Google, how do I stop my dog from biting me or chewing on me, you're going to get everything from, like, go buy this sour apple spray at PetSmart, all the way to, like, go chain them up in the backyard. And it's just like, the two very polarized opposites, and there's not a whole lot of in between. And if you do find that, it's like, how much time are you going to spend trying to find a quick solution, to where if you just have that resource and a buddy to call or text, it's that quick. It's just like, hey, tap them on the nose and be done with it. Drive on.
Absolutely.
So we could spend this entire episode talking about, learning how to train and all that stuff. But really, what we're here talking about today is a 1.5-year-old puppy, essentially. I know it's 16 months, but it's close enough for me. So it's a 1.5-year puppy. you have gone through the learning curve, the frustrations, the excitement, all of the emotions and feelings that uh, come up and show themselves when we're trying to get a young puppy, not even our first dog sometimes, but a young puppy figuring out the wild bird game, and more specifically the ruffed grouse game in the woods. And it's like we talk on this podcast all the time about just keep going, exposing the dog, putting them in the right situations, and eventually you're going to start seeing that light switch come on. It's going to start flickering, then it's going to stay on longer, and then it's this boom, that floodlight's going to come on, and it's on. And so I think a lot of people, I get random emails and messages from some listeners when we talk about that, and they may not be fully aware of what I'm describing when I say you start seeing that light switch come on. I've had people write in and say like, "Oh, my dog is, starting to actually run down the trail. The light switch is coming on." It's like, I don't want to be rude and say like or discourage them and be like, "Well, okay, like it's figuring out to maybe range out in the woods, so like, cool, take the win." But more or less, I'm talking about when they start figuring out there are birds and game out there to be found, they're searching them out, they're hunting them, they're actually trying to find them. You had that light bulb moment as recently as just a week or two ago prior to this recording. And so I want to talk about the natural progression in the actual grouse woods, and I want to start with the frustrations and the learning curves, and maybe you're coming out of the woods just like, oh my god, all the worries, is he gonna get it? And then I want to end with what it truly felt like when the light switch truly flipped on a week ago. So kind of hit rewind, go back to the start of the season, and tell me where you're at going into the season, and how you guys were actually progressing in the grouse woods early on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So even just a little further back than that, like when I got him, I picked him up like October 20 something last year. So I got him kind of in the heart of it all. And he was just a little puppy, and I had enough people around me up here that just said, take him out and get him in the cover early. So we spent a lot of late season last year, winter, uh, skip the quiet season. And then as soon as we could, like we did spend a ton of time just moving through cover. We did not, I can remember like last November flushing 5 birds with him. He was eating mushrooms and deer poop and not paying any
Being
attention.
a puppy.
Yeah. But I did my best truly did my best to like tell myself ahead of time, like, I'm not going to have high expectations, even for this first year, which he is a little older. He's old enough for like, whatever happens, happens, exposure. We're going to go, we're going to have fun, give him the season kind of thing. So I think I did a pretty good job of keeping that in mind of like, not a ton of pressure, not a ton of high expectations. Last late summer, early fall kind of training season, we got out quite a bit. And it was, just walking in the woods, he really never, nothing there that made me think like, oh, this is all going to work out. Couple of finds on grouse in that training season that was big for me, just getting excited about. But when the season rolled around, we opened up September 20th up here. When the grouse season rolled around this fall, I was still coming into it with a dog that had pointed, I think, 2 grouse, and they were very flash point, quick, not the real deal. And I was fine with that. And for the first, I don't know, month of the season, we went as much as humanly possible, and he bumped and bumped and bumped and bumped birds, and it was great. The quote of the season, we did a little grouse camp in early October, and 2 of us were out hunting with my puppy. 2 of us were back at camp. When we got back, we said like, we put up 6 grouse, and they're getting up early, no shots or anything like that. And they said, well, how far out were the birds getting up? Were they pretty flighty? And the guy I was with was like, about as far as the dog, because we just bumped birds all season, and it was great. And I was fine with it. I not a ton of expectations for him to just all of a sudden figure it out. So that was the majority of our season. I think up until a couple weeks ago, he had pointed 6 grouse total, including the couple points in the training season. And again, they were, point and then rip the bird. And that woodcock thing was great to us. Like we had a pretty good little stretch of the season this year where he did point some woodcock, point them and then rip them. And then he had a few that were pointed and well handled and shot over him. And that was huge for us. That was, if that was the end of our first season, I would have been totally satisfied with it. It was awesome. And then woodcock disappeared and we got right back to bumping grouse.
Yeah. Let's hit pause right here, because you described so many, I guarantee you so many people listen to this are like, that's my dog. Like point rip. They're bumping birds. But it sounds like you're going into this with the right mindset. It's like, hey, he's a young dog. He's going to figure it out. We're going to let the birds teach him. I want to go more into your mindset and did you do anything when they would bump the birds? Would you give a correction? Would you whoa? Would you recall? Or would you just let the dog chase until his heart was content?
No, I let him chase. And I should say that too. Like he knows what the word whoa means from like puppy conditioning with whoa, here and there with some food bowl stuff and going through the door. But I deliberately, and for better or for worse, I don't know yet, but I deliberately waited to do like a formal whoa program. We're going to do that this summer, or this off season, but I didn't do it last year. I didn't feel like he had enough bird exposure in his puppy months, like real puppy months, to start putting that much pressure on him for me. I'm just as new as he is. And so that felt like a lot for me. And so I haven't done any formal whoa training. And so I just let him chase. I let him chase. And the first few birds, like especially the summer birds that we flushed together. I mean, he's a 40, 50 yard dog. And he would run out to 100 yards after flushing a grouse. And that to me was just exciting. Obviously that chase will have to be worked on at some point, I guess. But for me, I was like, hey, look how excited he is about it. That's fine by me.
The whoa thing is really interesting is ultimately, I wouldn't say that's necessarily wrong. I mean, there's really not too many things that are right or wrong and black and white like that in this world. But ultimately, it sounds like you wanted the birds to have meaning to the dog before formalizing any kind of expectation to whoa or stop or stand or whatever the heck you want to call it. I'm assuming there's a few clarifications here. You weren't shooting at any of these birds. You didn't shoot at any bump birds for sure. It sounds like you just let them chase. Were you shooting any wild flush birds? Like if you're out in the woods and you walked one up, would you shoot at that?
I'll tell you, yeah. And here's the thing. My again, for better or for worse, judge away. But at the beginning of the season, what I kind of told myself was like, I'm gonna kill a grouse for the dog one way or another, and then we'll start putting some rules on. And I missed a lot of those ones that were supposed to be that one that I just in all season I kept telling myself like, I know it's not an assumption. I know I'm not supposed to be shooting at some of these birds. And I didn't shoot at all of them, but there was a good, I definitely, I broke those rules this year. I shot at wild flushes and I shot at some bump birds for sure in the beginning, just trying to get that first one for them. Had a funny season shooting wise because I've never shot this poorly and I've talked to a lot of people about it. And, I think the conclusion is I've been so eager to just get him that first bird that I definitely like threw some of that stuff to the wayside, which again, maybe I'll pay for it here in the future. Yeah, I had a lot of people tell me that, the birds will teach him, caution and that you should, it's okay to just kind of not work on that steadiness stuff at all for that first kind of freshman season. Just let him go out and let the birds teach him some stuff first and then come back around to it. Now, I had plenty of people on the opposite end of that spectrum tell me like, no, you need to at least have some whoa, intro stuff done before the season. And going back to what we talked about a little while ago, like that's everything. You get different answers for everything, and for me, I just kind of had to pick and choose, and I felt more like I wasn't really ready to do that full intro with him, and so I didn't do it. I just let him. This first season, he's ripped and chased for the most part.
Man, and that's so important, and honestly a little refreshing that you had the wherewithal or just understanding that if it doesn't make sense to you or you're not comfortable doing it, don't go force a square peg into a round hole, right? Like it has to make sense to you and feel good to you. Now, I'm not saying there are some people that they kind of never overcome their reluctancy or I don't know, their slow, methodical way, and it's like you can't argue that maybe their dog doesn't progress at the pace that they really should have. But at the end of the day, it's their dog, right? Like it's still not the wrong answer. And to your point, like you took the advice in, you heard it, and again, you ask 10 people some of these dog questions, you're gonna get five different answers, right? And so just the fact that you took it all in and you're like, this is my dog. I don't really feel comfortable doing at least kind of formal whoa before hunting season. Uh, that's commendable that you're actually comfortable doing that, especially on people's first dogs. A lot of first time owners, they kind of fall in the trap to where they start trying to follow everybody's advice and they're never making any progression. And you can even argue that sometimes it kind of stunts the growth of the dog because they're constantly like, oh, let's go do whoa today. No, I'm not doing whoa next week. And then it's just a bunch of back and forth. So it's like I tell everybody, like you got to kind of go with your gut here, especially, everybody's goals are different. Somebody can be telling you one thing based on, if you want to hunt test or trial or hunt, everybody's goals are different and every dog is different in their genetics and their capabilities. And so, somebody listening to this might be like, well, if you had whoa in the toolbox and that dog goes and bumps birds, you could have whoaed it and maybe it connects the dots and goes faster. But there's honestly no way to tell if that's true. We can kind of come up with the best guess that we have and theory, but I would say, based on what you're hearing, I would have done a few things different. Namely, I'm not shooting all those at those
No
bump
doubt.
birds,
Yeah, no doubt.
those wild flush birds. But I'm not telling you what you did was wrong because the whole point of this episode is we eventually got to where that light switch starts coming on and it starts connecting the dots. So who's to say that it was necessarily wrong when we ended up getting the result that we wanted?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that I think a lot of those decisions to be that way were much more rooted in uh, anxiety and kind of like fear of the unknown more so than any sort of wisdom. Because I think for me, again, I think I overdid it with the kind of like checklist using that first year dog book, but with the timeline on that, like that book starts out, it's like it's April and you get your puppy. Well, I got my puppy in October. So for me, it was like do what I can, but some of that timing didn't add up, and some of that I had to. I mean, he's not 8 months old for this first season; he's a year old, and so we're doing some of that stuff that potentially could be done with a different dog in the first like actual first puppy season. Whereas he got a little bit of a season last year of just learning cover and conditions and weather and exercise, and then this year he's a little older, but I really tried. And again, like I'm not on a timeline. And I've hunted over a lot of rock star grouse dogs that are, 6. So I don't, I deliberately have gone slow. I have had enough people tell me like, you only have one dog. You're not trying to train someone else's dog and you're not trying to train a string of dogs and you're not trialing or testing. So what's
What's the
What's the
rush?
difference? Take it as it comes. So that's what I've done. And then, yeah, shooting at the bump bird thing is yeah. I got no
Well,
excuses for that
man,
one.
it's hard. I'm not going to say that I don't pull up on them. I'm not going to say that my finger isn't on the trigger. But especially starting out, I would have shot them. I started out with a started dog, so it's like I didn't really have that problem. So I can't go back in time and necessarily say if I'm in your shoes with my first dog and we're figuring it out together that I'm gonna be as disciplined on the trigger finger as I might be right now. And it's frustrating to watch those birds fly away, but it's there's a million different ways to skin this cat. And at the end of the day, does the dog eventually end up where we want it? And obviously we've teased at it a little bit, so let's just jump on in. I want to hear that moment that the stars aligned and your hopes and dreams kind of came to fruition here. I want to hear the story of that light switch turning on and you just all you're left standing there holding a bird going, wow, it finally happened.
So I, spent the season missing shots at birds that I shouldn't have been shooting at, and killing some woodcock and having fun. And then we have a long deer season here in northern New York where I live, but the part of it that I really wanted to participate in came along in that kind of Thanksgiving stretch. We got some snow. I got focused on putting some time in the deer woods, and we did that. We got together as a family, and we hunted deer a lot. And I still ran the dog here and there in like late November and early December, but a lot more of like let's fit in 45 minutes after work or before work, as opposed to kind of a structured like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to go chase grouse. We still moved some birds and things like that in that stretch of time. But leading into Christmas, we lost all of our snow up here, and it was all of a sudden looking like early November and very enticing to get back out there. And I kind of had that realization of, hey, I haven't been as focused on trying to get a grouse with the dog. We've still been running, but now I have some time. The holidays are coming. I'd like to spend some time getting back out there and doing some of this kind of the real deal, putting some days in the grouse woods with this weather and taking advantage of it before the winter sets back in. And so that's what we did. We had a couple of walks where we bumped a couple of birds right before Christmas, and we got through Christmas. And the day after Christmas, I took him out and we had a light dusting of snow, the 26th. And I was having it in my head that like this is going to happen. He had a couple of like false points that were just really great, and he had pointed a grouse and held it for me to flush it. And that was great. Like, it was like if it had flushed out the other side of the cover, I might have had a shot at it. That could have been the one. And I was texting people like he had the real deal grouse point just happened. Like, he pointed it and he held it for me to flush, and the bird flushed, and it was like, I didn't see it. It flew out the other side of the cover, but it was right there. I could taste it. And
Did you
then
do anything in that instance? Did you shoot in the air? Did you say, verbal good dog? Like, did you do anything to mark that and kind of try and convey to him like, hey, this is what I wanted. Good job. We finally got it.
definitely so I flushed it, it flushed out the back door there. He took off after it and chased a little ways and came back to me. And I definitely, we celebrated that moment a little bit together with the best high pitched voice that I can do. But I was on cloud nine, just kind of coming back around. And like I said, he had a couple of grouse points before, but that was the first one where I was like, that was it right there. Yeah. And then the next day, so I live in like pretty good, there's pretty good grouse cover around, some pocket covers and stuff. There's birds, but if you drive a little ways, not far, you can get into some better stuff. And I got sitting here thinking about the weather, thinking about how he had just had that point. And I had said to my wife, like, tomorrow we might drive just a little ways and get into some of those areas where right now, typically they would be snowed in, and it was, 50 degrees and drizzly and rainy and really nice. And I jumped in the truck that next day and drove over to one of those areas that I felt would be a little bit better. And we walked in and it was like really, I had texted a buddy that morning and said, because he in October, he was talking about like the October mist and how those like drizzly wet days in October with a little fog on are just so special to him. And I texted him that morning and said, is December mist the same as October mist? And he said, if it's, he said, when it's 50 degrees, I'd say so. And so that's what we did. It was like one of those days we walked in and we were only 15 minutes from the truck. You know, the light switch thing too, this is another thing that we haven't really talked about is I would see him earlier in the season hit woodcock scent and get cautious. And I would see him hit grouse. Well, I would know it was grouse scent because rather than get cautious, he would start running really fast until he ripped the bird. And a couple weeks ago, I started to really see him get like quote unquote birdie, where like I would notice the difference in his tail. If he's like working some scent, his tail wasn't moving, but all of a sudden his tail would be going a mile a minute. And I would kind of pick up on that and see that and notice that and register that. And that's what happened that morning was I saw that his tail was going, he was all intense and just working the edge of this logging road. And he locked up on point. Beautiful. I was like, you know, smile on my face. So I got ready. And as I started to walk in, he moved again and he worked the edge of that road for probably like 40 yards. And locked up again. And in my head, I was like, it's going to happen. This is it, you know, and
here it comes.
And he locked up a second time. And I, you know, took a few steps towards him and this bird flushed out right at my face. And I promptly missed the first trigger. And it turned to my right and started going away from me. And I swung and pulled that second trigger and watched it tumble down. And it was one of those, it was a moment, man. It was, the thing I kept saying was that you take so many shots on grouse where you're like firing into the cover where they go and you have to go see if you hit them, you know? And I was so glad that this first bird was one where it was like it flew out of that thick stuff and into some shorter cover where I really got to watch it like tumble out of the sky. I'll never forget it. It was a very special moment.
So you have that picture perfect highlight reel in your head that you can at any point go back to and reimagine from, you know, the dog work, even the extended relocation and working probably a running bird or at least a bird that just kind of meandered on down the trail, you know, relatively soon. And then the shot and it falling. It's just like you kind of got everything. It's just you got the milked dog work, and then you got the full on even the oh no, I'm ruining it. I missed the first shot. Oh, I got to catch up to it on the second shot. You kind of got all of the emotional roller coaster within that one sequence.
We were 15 minutes from the truck and I had the thought of like, maybe we'll just turn around and go home. It was perfect. I mean, there's, you know, if I go back through the texts, there's definitely some text to some friends that is like, it made me thankful that in a way that I didn't hit the ones I had shot at that weren't perfect, because the one we finally got together was just the way it was supposed to happen. You know, it was so cool. And he didn't retrieve it to hand, but he hunted dead and found it and brought it over toward me a little bit. And I really wasn't planning on taking it away from him until he, you know, took a half of the tail fan out. And I said, well, I'd like to preserve at least part of that bird. So yeah, it was very, very, very cool.
Stuff like that, it makes all of the long sucky walks, all of the misses, all of the close ones. It's kind of like this is what I've been chasing. And then it's funny, man, you really ride that high, like you have that adrenaline spike, and then even afterwards when it's time to kind of, okay, put the bird in the vest, like, you know, pat him on the back, give him some water and then release him again. It's almost, It's like an adrenaline dump. It's like, man, like how are we gonna top this one? It's kind of like you said, you just kind of want to turn around, go home, and celebrate with your dog and your buddies, like we did it. But obviously, you're still in the woods, so talk to me about like that emotional roller coaster afterwards. Did you kind of stop and really take it all in, just take a deep breath, like, man, this is what we've been out here chasing all season, all fall.
Yeah, I did as much as he would kind of let me. It was funny because truly I felt like I had just killed a 10 point. I was like, that's what it was like. And so with anything like that, like I'm that guy that's like, we're gonna sit here, like actually physically sit down and take this in. And which is this is a good thing, but to me at the time I was like, come on, dude. He was like, this was great. He was very excited about the bird, very interested in it. The second that I was like, he just kind of was like
Went off
off and
hunting. Yeah.
yeah, which I can continue here was great. But for me, that did in a way like cut that moment short, which is I suppose that's a good thing. I took the time, I reflected, I took a few pictures. And I just told myself like, put this thing in the vest and follow him around and I'll take some more pictures later kind of thing.
It's so funny the impact some of these moments and some of these birds and just the time in the woods with these dogs means so much more to us that the dogs don't even comprehend or recognize. It's like I've had some experiences. I'm thinking of Rachel off the top of my head. I've had some birds to where it's just like picture perfect, just point, shot, bird. And it's just like she'll just kind of almost just do a drive by on the retrieve and just like, will you take this bird so I can keep hunting? And it's just like I'm wanting to stop and milk it and really kind of reflect on what just happened. And they're just all business. And it's so funny when you think about it, like just the meaning that this has on some of us sometimes. And the dogs are just like, it's just business as usual for them.
It was awesome. And so I put that thing in my vest and we started up the ridge and kept hunting. And I'll tell you the heartbreaker is that you talk about the impact it had on him. Now that's his first time doing that. He's only pointed a few grouse and he's only pointed and held a couple at that point, right? Uh, so we work our way up, turn around, we're working our way back down toward the truck. No more birds at that time, and we'd had a great hunt. I'm still on cloud nine. I mean, I'm all in my head, and I come up and I see this. Meanwhile, he never sees the trail again because all of a sudden he decides that those birds are in the cover and he's gonna look like a real grouse dog for the rest of the day and turns out the rest of the week, which is what he was doing. I mean, he was working at 70 yards and that was brand new. So I was just listening to the bell, come across this beautiful little spot for a photo and think to myself like, okay, great. Like I'll take the time, take the bird out. And I'm like putting the bird on this tree and monkeying around with my phone. And, at 70 yards, I hear that bell stop just long enough for me to regret exactly what I was doing. And then I hear the bird go while I'm, goofing off trying to take a photo. So he ended up
Man,
pointing another bird right after.
dude, that's a good thing to talk about because it truly is a balancing act. Is we want to have that memory, we want that picture. Everybody says, especially if they've been doing this for a while, is one of their biggest regrets or something if they could change is taking more pictures, stopping to enjoy the moment and set it up. And like you said, there's never a good time to do it. And also there's a reason why there's so many tailgate pictures. And I'm guilty of this as well. Is when I'm in the woods, I don't want to stop and take a picture. I don't want to stop the hunt, get the dogs out of the mindset. They don't want to do it. So I don't want to stop in the woods. But then at the same time, like every picture can't be a tailgate picture. And so if you wait till the end of the hunt every time, you're trying to figure something out at the tailgate, and there's just never a good time in the actual woods on a hunt to stop and do that picture because, to your point, that's always when they're going to point or flush another bird, and you're just like, crap, get your head in the game.
I laughed about it, you know, as I'm
Yeah.
sure he did too. But I was definitely like, oh, there you, that's what I get, you know,
Yeah.
whatever.
So,
I didn't even get the picture.
oh God. So I've got two kind of questions here, and there's really no right or wrong answer here, but I want to get just your theory. This is your dog. You know your dog better than I do, and the area that you're in, and just kind of your gut reaction to this is there's two things leading up to this moment that I would say stands out to me that's a little different than just a month or so early before, prior to deer season, and your struggles and getting close but not exactly there. Fast forward, we finally have that walk. We have the light switch come on. There's a couple things that stand out to me that were different. One, you took a break, right? I'm a big component, especially if somebody's having a bunch of boogers that they're kind of dealing with on their dog. This goes for training for a test, trial, hunting, whatever. Sometimes it's kind of like you can do everything right, but if you're focused too much on it, you're doing too much. Sometimes, in my opinion, the best thing you can do is sometimes just hit pause, take a break, let the dog refresh its mind. And it's just, you know, all of the exposure and the lessons that you've built up to, that foundation is there if you've done that correctly. You don't have to worry about it too much. So, you know, this is kind of a good example to where there's no right answer, but would you think that just giving him a month or two off, however long it was, do you think that that mentally just kind of connected some dots for him? I mean, especially when you're talking about a puppy, we're not even talking about a year and a half old pup yet. Those 2 months can be, that can change the maturity of a young dog exponentially in just 2 months. So yeah, I want to kind of get your thought process on that. And then I've got one more for you.
Yeah, I mean, true. I don't know. I would be taking a guess. I'll tell you this. I saw big changes in him as far as like the way he was kind of starting to look like he was searching after we killed woodcock over him. And like when I worked him in the summer on maybe a dozen pigeons, we never killed a pigeon over him. And I had quite a few people this fall when he was bumping a lot of birds say to me like, you haven't closed the loop with him. And it's important that you know, you need to kill some birds over the dog. And so when we had killed some woodcock over him, it was huge for the way that he was like working cover and starting to point and hold woodcock. He was still bumping grouse. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event where they had planted huns, and we had an opportunity to like take him out and blow off some steam while we were waiting for the event to go on. And we put out a couple of these huns for him, and it was not perfect the way that he handled them. But his like drive for them was bigger than I've seen him on other things. And we were able to kill those birds for him. And this, then we kind of took the Christmas break, you know, we still ran him. But these points and leading up to us finally killing some grouse over him, like last week and the week before, kind of were on the tail end of that. So I don't know that that made a difference. I don't know that the break made a difference, but it very, very well could have. Those are some factors that are kind of different than the ongoing, like we're just going to keep hunting grouse every day.
Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but that's kind of the question and topics I like exploring, or just kind of coming up with my own theory and just file it away in the bank, you know, for later on. And whether that's on this dog or the next one is just, you know, this is where the pieces of the puzzle kind of start forming for me. And kind of in that same vein, you talk about woodcock, you connected that dots, you got the full sequence, you started seeing the dog kind of connect things when you started getting a couple successful reps on woodcock, but he was still bumping grouse. Fast forward after the Christmas break, the woodcocks probably moved out, they've migrated out, they've moved on, they're not in the woods. So you don't have that secondary scent to where any bird scent he's coming across is purely just grouse. And so I'm wondering if the absence of woodcock, after kind of getting that full circle and the understanding that I find bird, I point bird, dad shoots bird, I'm wondering if the absence of that scent or even that option in the woods somehow kind of allowed that moment on the grouse to come to light, if you will.
Yeah, very, very possible. And especially over time, because since the woodcock have left here, we've had a good stretch of, finding grouse, not every time, but almost every time we go out. It might be one bird, but we haven't been coming up short much this season as far as like we've been able to go out and find at least one bird. So he's had those contacts, a stretch of them since the woodcock left. That's, I don't know, very interesting. I was grateful as all heck when the woodcock were here because it was felt like just what he needed. But I don't know. And I was almost the other day like thinking, I don't know too much. Like I'm still learning about like sending conditions. And the other day seemed to me to be like perfect. Like it was cold enough that it was, it was chilly out, but for this time of year up here, no snow at all and 50 degrees and it had rained, but it was kind of just drizzly. Um, that part of it felt perfect too, as far as not only sending conditions, but also the birds holding.
Yeah.
They were not like flighty birds last week. We ended up moving more birds after this too, obviously, and killing more birds over them. And those birds held tighter than I would say they've held all season. I don't know if that was the rain. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it made a difference.
Yeah. These are the type of things that I'm always curious to pick people's brains on, because I think this is where you start, it's very easy to go out and it's just like, oh yeah, the dog did what it was supposed to do. We finally had that moment, and then drive on, and you never give it any more thought than that. I wish I was that type of person. I'm not, I'm always curious and trying to figure out the cheat code and that pattern that probably doesn't actually exist, but you're never going to find it if you don't look for it. And stuff like that, in my head, I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, woodcock, the dog learned that bird scent means stop, but then woodcock, they don't run like grouse. And so does that grouse and foot scent, did that bring that chase out to where the dog just didn't understand how much space and cushion to give that grouse when that scent gets stronger as the closer it gets. It's there's a million different questions I could ask you that neither one of us know, but we
For
could
sure.
play, come up with all the theories. But I want to talk about the hunts after this, because you got this moment, and I remember you got it, and it was a really big deal. You put it on Instagram. We were messaging like, "Hey, good on you. I know you worked for it." And then it was like the next day or two, boom, here's another magical day. And to your point, like, it only takes one or two sequences to completely change a dog's behavior. And so when we talk about that light switch, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that one exposure, that one rep, that light is on. And then it's like the next time you drop them on the ground, if I remember correctly, it's like, okay, now I have a grouse dog. We didn't get lucky. Now we have a dog actually hammering the grouse and going after them.
Yeah. I mean, I kept joking with people and saying like, he's starting to look like a grouse dog, because after that first bird that we actually put in the bag, he wasn't, I mean, he's been very, very close, which I haven't really harped on or anything, but he's been very, very close working. And all of a sudden he's working at 70 yards, which I'll take all day long. And that was great. And really just hammering cover and diving into brush piles. And 2 days later, I was traveling, and I was traveling back into kind of the town where I live, on my way back here. And I just stopped, and I needed to get the dog out of the truck and burn some energy. I had the time, the weather was still nice. And I was thinking like, should take full advantage of this before. I mean, we got snow last night. It'll be full winter here as it's supposed to be. And I got thinking like, let's try it again. And so we ran 2 days after that, for like an hour and a half, and we moved 7 birds, and we had one wild flush, which I did shoot at.
How
And
dare
missed,
you?
and missed. And we had one wild flush, and then he locked up on point. held for me to flush. We flushed the bird. I shot. Um, this is, standing there thinking I had a decent shot, but I'm like looking down into the little ravine where I watched the bird fly, and I'm seeing him, and he's kind of covering the turf where the bird would have fallen if it had fallen. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I kind of realized that I'm just letting him do the work down there, and I'm not going. Oh, and I was like, I better go down there and follow up. So I walked in there, and he ran past that bird two or three times, and then all of a sudden came back around to it and found it. And so there we go. We had another one that was just, in a 3-day stretch, he's point and held for me to flush and flush the bird and kill the bird. And um, cloud nine for me again. And I'm thinking like this was kind of at the end of a walk where we're about to turn and swing back toward the truck. And we killed another one. And I was just, that's two now this week. And hallelujah for my Instagram, right? Whatever. So, but I'm stoked. And we start working back, and it's like point another one and hold it and point. And I missed a bunch that day, but he ended up, by the time we got back almost to the truck, we had one wild flush. He pointed two more singles. We're almost back to the truck. He points, goes on point. I flush, three come out of this little spot. So we're up to six or whatever. And I've, promptly missed the covey of grouse, which, pretty late season stuff up here. But I'm just on cloud nine that like he's just pointing like pointing grouse left and right. It's like it had and working cover better than ever before, and like just looking like the fruits of our labor. Just it was special. And then we get back to where I can see the truck, and he goes on point again on a brush pile, and I had to actively like kick the brush pile to get that last bird to fly, and it flew up, and I hit that one. And so then it's like killing one bird was one thing, but having two at the end of that day was like I just felt like everything was paying off, and he was just pumped. And
you guys are the world's greatest grouse hunting team.
Yeah, we're this finished dog and a professional grouse hunter, Nick. Yeah.
Yep, go ahead and start taking on the client dogs and start training, man. That's how it goes. It's so interesting, man. I've seen it a number of times. I obviously get the privilege of hearing about these moments from a lot of listeners, and it never gets old hearing about it, because it truly is just, you got to get the dogs on wild birds. When we talk about getting them in that situation, it's frustrating. You really got to be patient. You have to really go out and earn it with your boot leather, with your patience, with your discipline. Well, maybe not your discipline on shooting wild birds, but all of that stuff matters. And then when it actually comes to light, it's amazing just how fast those dogs is. Oh, I got this now. Just stand back. I got this. And then, you're just rewarded. And it's hard not to just smile the whole time, like rethinking about it, because it's really that moment when people talk about seeing puppies develop. I like to think that that's what they're talking about is, we all love seeing a dog on pen raised birds in a training field slam on a point, right? Like it's a young dog puppy. If that doesn't get your blood going, like, there's something wrong with you. But I would say multiply that exponentially on an actual wild bird that has no human scent, no foot scent. The dog had to go find it on its own. Like, all of that stuff it's just a different level of just amazement for me, honestly. I mean, I don't want to get too, gushy or over romanticize it, but it truly is a moment that once you experience it, it's like crack, man. You just want to go, you just want to see it time and time again.
Well, I mean, I had said to somebody the other day, it might have been Kevin Erdvig. I had said that, I feel like I just shot a 10 point. He said, well, that's the best point. The best part is you get to keep shooting 10 point after 10 point after 10 point. Once it all comes together. Like, oh,
I could see Kevin saying that. Yeah.
They're all special kind of thing. But it was just, I don't know. I took full advantage of the green Christmas. You know what I mean? it was a good week. I took my dad out the following day, and we didn't kill any birds that day, but he got to see the dog work, and he didn't grow up with bird dogs either. And he had taken some puppy walks with me, and he said he got to watch the dog point a grouse, um, and he said, well, this is a whole different dog. And it was like, yeah, well, I don't know. I didn't do it. He's flipped a switch for some reason that I don't quite have figured out.
Well, you say you didn't do it, but you did. You didn't spend all the time in the field training whoa or force fetch or all this obedience, all of that stuff. Obviously, I'm a component for in the right sequence and timing, of course. But you spent the time and dedication and the opportunities to to put the dog in those situations, right? Like you
Yeah.
did the fun walks, you did the puppy walks, and I tell everybody, so many people get these puppies going all the way back to you don't know what you don't know, and okay, I get this puppy, what am I working on now? And I think that they think I'm going to start telling them like, all right, you're going to start doing this command and then this and vigorous training sessions. It's like, no, take your dog on a fun run. Get it exploring, get it excited to go find things, figure out the smells and cover means game and to go with you in the field and all this other stuff. You got time to work on all the obedience. And I'm not saying ignore all of that. There's a foundation for a reason, but one of my favorite things since coming into this world, and if I can kind of convey this to anybody new starting out, is get your dogs off leash, get them in the woods, get them exploring the fields, get them used to exploring with you and developing that relationship to where it's like we love the relationship between the dog and bird. They need to understand the relationship between the bird and us just as much. And you're not going to learn that by just doing 10-15 minute training sessions on place or sit or whoa or any of that stuff. And again, all of that has a time and a place, but just get back to expose the dog and give them the opportunity to learn naturally is my preference, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exposure. That back to that Bailey book, that's kind of that first year she talks a lot in there about like you're not always training. Like some of it's just exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was huge.
And it is. So, man, we could obviously talk about this all day. I got a couple last questions here for you. First off, I want to hear your plans. It's 2024 now. We're recording this. Hunting season is at least up in your neck of the woods is probably coming to a close. Talk to me about your plans for the off season. You said that you haven't done formalized whoa. You haven't done force fetch. Talk to me about your plans. Are you planning on any of that this year to prepare for next fall?
Yeah, so I'll start with we've got a long grouse season here in New York State. So we're gonna keep it up as much as possible. Obviously, once we get some deeper snow, we'll back off somewhat and focus, on having fun and not hitting it so hard. But we'll still be out there for a while. I'm headed tomorrow night down south a little ways to a grouse camp for the weekend. And so we're gonna keep that up as long as possible. And then I think the winter I'd like to spend making a plan for the kind of the formal whoa process, as you know well and have well documented. There's a lot of options there, and I've looked into several of them. So I kind of need to get my plan together as to what I'm going to pick. That's going to be a big one. Working on putting some steadiness into the process this spring. And then I kind of need to do the same thing, I think, with force fetch, or at least some sort of formal, trained retrieve program, because he is a little mouthy with birds, and that's been a thing that we've kind of dealt with a little bit since he was a puppy. Not really sure what happened, but he's a little mouthy with birds. To the point where I think I've heard enough people say that the best fix for that is a trained retrieve force fetch program of some sort. So yeah, I've got some homework to do before we get into that stuff, but those two things are definitely the plan for between now and next September. And other than that, just cleaning up some of the little stuff that we've let go a little bit here during the season, and learning and having fun, man. I don't, it's been awesome so far, and he's, this is be his second training season, and we worked a lot last year and had a ton of fun. So I want to go back to some of those kind of foundational things. And I started a little piece of a lot of different things last year and didn't really quite finish any of them, including some of this simple stuff like place and sit and things like that. So I'd like to go back and work on some of those little things, but we're having fun, man. That's the name of the game.
And that's the main piece too. I mean, that's what we're all after. I mean, I say it all the time, and I need to remind myself of this oftentimes as well. As if you're not having fun, then you need to stop. Maybe take that break. If something's not lining up and you're not enjoying it, then something's off. And sometimes just taking a couple weeks off, it's not the end of the world. Your dog's not gonna forget how to point. It's not gonna forget how to use its nose. Sometimes a break is the right prescription in some instances. Last little question as we wrap this up. You are the RGS event coordinator or engagement coordinator up in the Northeast. So tell everybody what's going on in the Northeast. What do you guys need people's involvement? What should they be aware about? Any news happenings, all that kind of fun stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a heck of a 2023. We had a great year in the Northeast. Back in action, quote unquote, post COVID stuff has really come, we're just chapters and events and engagement stuff at an all-time high in 23. It was an awesome year. We had some new chapters that had their first big events that were just the highlight of the year in some ways. And we're just kicking back into gear here after the holidays. It's always fun to see like people, putting their best foot forward for their plan for 2024. And so, I've got chapters all across, again, from New York to Maine, and everywhere in between. So if people out there are looking to get involved, I mean, we've got some great things going on this year. Again, new chapters and age old chapters that are looking for new members. So I'd encourage everybody to join. And I think we have some great employment postings up too. If people are looking to really get involved with RGS, take a look and come and join the team. We've got some great stuff open there on that front. But our habitat team is ramping up. We had a great 2023 there as well. We've got private lands foresters that are doing great work with landowners up here in a couple of states in the Northeast, and we're hiring more in that regard. And we've got some big projects underway on the national forests up here, and Green Mountain, White Mountain, and Finger Lakes in the Northeast. So Todd Waldron, our forest conservation director, is a machine, and really just he's a few years into just the big build out up here, and it's really come together, and it's exciting to see. So high hopes for a big 2024 up here for the Ruffed Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society. And I've got a full stake in the mission now that we're pointing grouse. So
got to keep those birds on the landscape. It does no good to turn the light switch on if you don't have any way to direct that light, right?
Amen, buddy. Absolutely.
Yep. Well, man, I enjoyed it. I'm excited to kind of hear how you progress during the off season. And of course, you have my number. So, add me to that sounding board that we discussed at the start of all this as you kind of figure out and try and make sense out of the 50 million different ways to train woe. And then even more so, 100 million different ways to do force fetch. It's each one is a completely different fire hose, if you will. But, man, I enjoyed it. It was so fun to kind of hear your stories and the success again. The puppy moments and stuff just coming. I love it. It's never going to get old for me. And just remember that first one, man. It's just you got that highlight reel, you got that good one, and just keep it at the forefront of your mind.
It would be hard to forget, man. Absolutely. No, I appreciate you very much, Nick. Thanks.